Very good evening and welcome to the India Development Debate. I'm Tamanna Inamdar. Our top focus and our top story remains the standoff with China. The Ministry of External Affairs put out a statement earlier this evening reiterating that it was unilateral action by China that resulted in the clash at the LAC. They've also clarified that no Indian troops are missing. This is an important clarification coming in from the MEA, and they've said that commander level communications are being maintained between the two sides. Meanwhile, big things brewing back home with the national discourse turning towards Atmanirbharta in the Chinese context. How do we reduce dependence on imports and funding from China? Those of you who regularly watch this show would have seen our conversation yesterday where we outlined in detail what the problem is. The question is, where are the solutions? Now, a couple of things have happened today. There are reports that the IPL may relook at their title sponsor. There was news today doing the rounds of a Chinese handset maker postponing a launch, and then the Indian Railways also went ahead and cancelled a Chinese contract, a Chinese company's contract worth about 500 crore rupees. The technical reason is that not enough progress was made. Meanwhile, a lot of emotional people also asking for different things. Let's throw our television sets, let's throw our mobile phones, let's boycott that bowl of Hakka noodles. But is that really the solution? Let's talk on the basis of data and facts on what we can really do. What the situation calls for is a serious SWOT analysis of where our dependence lies and what is in the realm of possibility to reduce that dependence. How do we move towards that goal? To find the solutions, we first need to identify the problem, and my colleague Mubina is joining me now to outline the extent of dependence on Chinese imports that we have. Mubina?
India and China are big trading partners is definitely no secret. Right from steel to toys, India does purchase quite a bit from China. Here are some of the sectors wherein we see a huge amount of imports coming in, not just from China, but from across the world. Topping the charts is electrical and electronic components, where incidentally, China is a big supplier to India. This is followed by nuclear reactors, boilers and machinery. Organic chemicals, iron and steel as well are some of the big components that we import from the world. In fact, just a couple of years ago, China has been accused of dumping steel into Indian territory. Plastic articles, fertilizers, optical photo, vehicles other than railway, as well as mineral fuel and mineral oils are some of the other segments or products that we import from the world. But let's look at how much we import from China vis-a-vis our total or overall import bill. So in 2019-2020, that's April to Feb of the last year, we did see a total import figure of $442 billion. Out of this, $62 billion was from China. That's 14.1% of our overall imports. Now, it's interesting to note that from our total import bill, the import bill coming in from China has actually increased. So in FY19, it was roughly at about 13.7%, and now it's at 14.1%. But it's not just trading partners, it's also about investment from China. Total trade value, like I mentioned, was $86 billion, with exports at only $18 billion. The trade, in fact, with China is, by the way, the second highest after the United States. India, meantime, does tend to export as well to China, but that's third highest after the US and UAE. However, it's worthy to note that India's imports from China is actually the highest among all countries. And that's perhaps the reason why the Atmanirbharta pitch has garnered so much steam.
Well, thank you for that, Mubina. Mubina, they're laying down all the facts as they stand. So yes, we have dependence, especially on certain very important things. APIs is one of them, which is the core ingredient of making medicines that we all consume. Electronics is another one, some important auto components as well. So let's look at these one by one. Joining me today on the conversation is Ajay Dua, former DIPP Secretary. I'm pleased to welcome Pankaj Mohendru, Chairman of ICEA, that's the India Cellular and Electronic Association. Vinny Mehta, Director General of ACMA, is speaking to us today, as is Anupa Manur, Assistant Professor at Takshashila Institution. Welcome to all of you, and thank you for joining us on the show. Ajay Dua, let me get a sort of opening comment from you on what we are seeing right now. I think it's safe to say this is not business as usual. You know, this let's stop buying Chinese kind of narrative crops up now and then again, but this time is different because the affront at the LAC is very, very serious, and this also happens to coincide with a larger government push and policy towards self-dependence. The context of reducing dependence on Chinese imports is at the right moment.
I couldn't agree with you more, Tamanna, on that. I don't think it's business as usual. We have to see the geopolitical relation, the overall geopolitical setup, even with our trading partners, and certainly trading partners with whom our business has grown much more in recent years than our traditional partners who have been EU and, say, the United States. Having said that, all that I'm concerned about is that are we in a position to very abruptly end our imports from China, or does that have to be gradual? The more I think about it, the more I come to the conclusion that yes, we cannot continue to be dependent upon imports for China forever. Certainly we should not be dependent upon them for our strategic industries, be it power, be it railways, be it nuclear power stations, those kind of things. We cannot be dependent upon them for so long. But having said that, there are a whole lot of things in India, and you yourself talked about pharmaceutical industry, where the core, the APIs come in large ways from China. We have stopped our own shop for making APIs. Same thing in electronics, particularly in telecommunication setup, be it in the making of the handsets, which is one thing, but that we can probably diversify to certain other countries. But in the telecommunication equipment, we continue to have fairly high dependence upon China. We would need to revisit that, come what may. Having said that, again, I'm using this phrase that let us be working towards getting independent of China, but by weighing the costs of doing it suddenly and over time. I think the the answer may be yes, let's start preparing, but let's not either impact our consumers, who will suffer if we put high duties or ban certain items, and also let us not disrupt our supply chains, because we want to not only sustain our supply chains, but we also want to get into supply chains where China might get displaced. So all that's going to need time, but certainly we cannot be on the one side.
Yes, absolutely. No, that is going to need time, and I think it also needs it also needs serious thought. I mean, the kind of sort of mockery of how seriousness the situation is when you have statements like let's boycott Chinese food, or you have a group of people coming together and jumping on a television set. It sort of really devalues how important this discussion and this conversation is. Pankaj Mohendru, I want you to come in with first laying the ground of what the real situation is. We know that the government has tried to incentivize domestic manufacture of mobile phones and other such electronic equipments. That has become the biggest target, quote unquote, right now in the context of what is happening between India and China.
97% of mobile phones are now made in India. 5 years back, we were producing only about 58 million handsets out of about 240 million we were consuming. Now we are consuming about 300 million, and almost 97% are made in India. About out of our 2 lakh 15,000 crore manufacturing, out of which we export 28,000 crores, our domestic component manufacturing is over 1 lakh crore. And I think Vinny will feel really happy about that. Now, this is the situation. It is also a fact that we have been working on Atam Nirbharta from 2015, and we have been, extremely successful. Question 5 years back was who's making phones in India. Now the question is who is not making phones in India. So almost, in fact, all companies, global companies, domestic companies have set up plants here. Manufacturing is very robust. Phased manufacturing program has kicked in very well. Components are being made here. Sub-assemblies are being made here. And we are moving towards...
No, but then Mr. Mohindra, explain to me
Yeah.
as I understand it, and please correct me if I'm wrong. So please explain to me and correct me if I'm wrong. As I understand it, Chinese owned brands are some of the most dominant players in the market today, handset manufacturers. Is
I
that
won't
true
say,
or is
I
that
won't,
not true? And then where are those phones being made?
the phones are being made in India. There are a lot of companies of Chinese origin who have invested here, who have created large employment here, and who are going to start to export from here. So I think we are not seeing the color of nationality. India's regulatory dispensation has been is that a company which starts making products here becomes a domestic company. And we are very conscious about that. And I think Ajay ji would be, most competent to talk about this, that what is our regulatory dispensation and our thought has been. Of course, we are now trying to build global Indian champion companies, which, Vinny's industry has done so valiantly, also motorcycles. We are trying to build a huge Indian domestic champion
Yeah.
company in the entry level.
Yes.
So we have great respect for what all the companies, including Samsung, Apple, Vivo, Oppo, Xiaomi, what they have done for India in terms of building a large manufacturing footprint and bringing the supply chain here. And we are, of course, we have been very concerned that our supply chain, a lot of it is based out of China, and we want to become a strong competitor. But let me flip this on another side. China is $14 trillion economy. It's going to be our largest future market. It's next to us. So I am not seeing we have crossed that stage that we are
No,
scared.
no, Mr. Mohindra, they don't let anyone in. No, they don't let anyone in. No,
No,
they
no,
don't
no.
let anyone in. This is this
That's not a
we know
that's
this. We know this of
that's
China's policy, whether it's
no, no, no,
as
no, no,
opposed
no.
to
That is
India
not
or
a
anyone else.
that is not a fact. That is really not a fact. That is a hunch. You see, and that was a reality 20 years back, 25 years back, maybe even 10 years back. China has a very large import. I ask you a question first. What is the import of electronics in China? $400 billion. So, this narrative is as serious as not eating noodles. I don't eat noodles. I don't like noodles, but that is not because they are of Chinese origin. I love Chinese food otherwise. So, this narrative that China is not a large importer is
Okay.
wrong. We must pursue the Chinese market because it's very, very
No, no.
favorably placed for us. And why are we imagining that we are so uncompetitive and so weak that
Okay.
we want to
Okay.
be import substitution on a little tiny market which is
No, no. The whole
world?
world has a problem with China's imports. 1 minute. Let me get more voices in on this. The whole world has
No,
a
no.
problem with China
China's
not
total
opening up its
imports.
doors enough. It's the conversation of several international forums.
Tamanna, find out the total Chinese,
Yeah. No, I just want to get more
not just
perspectives on this.
electronics.
It's a very important point, Mr. Mohindru. It's a, yeah, it's a very important perspective. No, it's a very important perspective, and I think we should get more voices in on this. Anupam Manu, do you want to come in on this point? Pankaj Mohindru says that India should look at Chinese market. We should look at increasing our exports to China and not be closed in about this. Is this the right time to have that conversation?
Yeah, I mean, obviously China is going to be a huge market. They are opening up their doors. They're welcoming more, imports into their country. But I don't think a China-specific policy has got to do with this. We got to start exporting more to the entire world.
Yeah.
Our share in global value chains is extremely limited. I mean, if you look at, for example, you could take any particular product, let's say even television sets, LCD monitors, India's share in the global value chain is 0.04%. And similarly, you can take it for laptops, you can take it for mobile phones, etc. Our overall addition in terms of value add into the entire global value chain is extremely limited. So the question really is about how do we increase our overall competitiveness? And if you manufacture competitive products, I think the Chinese itself, they will import, right? So you don't need to push or you don't need to do any of these extra things. And then if you're truly competitive, then you will obviously be welcome. It would make economic sense to be, let's say, part of something like the RCEP, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, and therefore you will get into more free trade agreements with not just China, but ASEAN as well, and many other countries. So the way forward is, about, it's not really self-sufficiency, it's not, closing your doors, it's about how do you become competitive. And by the way, putting tariffs, putting import duties or closing Indian, the kind of trade doors from outside, it will in fact hurt us. It will hurt our own manufacturing. So if you look at the entire things that, then you need to actually have a liberal trade. You can't, get part of the global value chains if you have closed doors. That's just logic.
Even as we have this conversation, news has come in today from Wire reports that India is perhaps planning extra tariffs, trade barriers on 300 imported products. So whether you like it or not, this direction, this conversation is moving in that direction. I want to get a sense of what's happening in the auto sector. And Vinny, we're so happy to have you on the show. It's being seen, auto is being touted in some segments as, an indigenous success story. But isn't the fact that in terms of components, there are still several components on which we are heavily dependent on China? How far are we from looking at alternative sources?
Tamanna, thank you for having me. Just to give you a perspective on the import content that we get from China. The overall import of auto components in India is around 17 odd billion US dollars. Of that, 27% comes from China. This is around $4.75 billion. And if you look at the overall size of the vehicle value chain, the automotive value chain, this is $120 billion. So of the $120 billion, about 4.75, which is around 4% of import that happens from China. Now, in this particular case, it is not the quantum of imports. The auto value chain is a rather complex and an integrated value chain. And some of the components that come into India are those that we do not have competence, technological competence, say the electronics part, the critical parts. We transitioned from BS4 to BS6 in just 3 years' time, whereas Europe took 12 years. Now, these kind of components, when you transition so quickly to another technology, you have to then rely on another market to get those components. Okay. Yes, and again, I mean, coming to the Atmanirbhar vision of the Prime Minister, I think the auto component industry, the entire automotive industry, in fact, has been a shining example of an Atmanirbhar industry. And I would agree that we should not get into a knee-jerk reaction, as Mr. Dua said, that the value chain is rather complex. Let's not disrupt the value chain. What happened in the COVID, in the aftermath and the lockdown across the globe, the value chains not just the automotive, several of them have suffered rather badly. It is now that we are once again coming back, streamlining, stabilizing. Another disruption at this juncture would be a harakiri. Okay, we must, be very measured, be very, very calculative,
Yeah.
calculate our strengths, calculate, as you
What?
said, we do a, SWOT
Yes.
analysis, and be very careful in doing what we do. There is absolutely no argument
Hmm.
we have to be Atmanirbhar. The lesson from the COVID and the lockdown has been every single economy, every single country, every industry wants to be in certain ways de-risking itself. Okay, and they are therefore looking inwards to be more self-sufficient, to be more
Yes.
competitive in that sense. And probably this geopolitical overture that has happened, it would probably precipitate
Mi-
or hasten that process. Okay, but no knee jerks, please. It will be very dangerous for the whole industry.
No, that's a good perspective, Mr. Mehta. What is your sense? Because the mood seems to be, if you read between the lines and you listen closely to the voices coming in, the mood seems to be that we need to send a strong message apart from just what our brave soldiers are doing at the LAC and the diplomatic conversations. To hit where it hurts, it has to be on the trade front. There's no doubt about that. Do you sense that there will be stringent measures coming in, Mr. Mehta?
Look, Tamanna, there are. One has to. There's a complete demarcation between what is a political overture and what is a practical business way of doing things. Okay, I'm not getting into it. Okay, there. The media and the political overture will keep on happening. It has been happening for the last 40 years. It will continue. And I think trade will find its way. We have to make sure that the industry remains viable, that the industry continues, jobs get created, money has no color, whichever economy it comes from. Business does not happen on emotions, right? These are long thought, long drawn processes on which business is built. I think we have to respect that. We need jobs in the country. We need investments in the country. I think we should not disrupt those. Okay, but yes, again, we must move towards self-sufficiency. There's no denying that.
Yeah.
We need to make our industry competitive. Anupam said that. I think we need to focus how we can be an export hub for the whole world. Okay, let's say even China does not allow big deal. That's one part of the market. Anupam was alluding to the global value chains. In the automotive space, the global trade, the auto component space is around $1,300 trillion, right? 1.3 trillion. Okay, and in that, the India share is just wee bit about 1.5%, right? So we are very minuscule in that sense. We have to look at our own competency. We have to see how we can be global competitive, okay? And when we talk about global competitiveness, it's the industry cannot do it alone, right? It has to be takes two to a tango. The industry has to rise up to the occasion, and
Yeah.
at the same time, there are certain expectations of the government. What are our key problems? Our big cost of capital is one of the highest in the world. We are literally we score very poorly when it comes to logistics. Our logistics costs are
Yes.
probably 10 to 14% more expensive. Our energy costs are expensive. So if some of these could be addressed, when I look at the component industry, we export
Yeah.
25%.
I think you've hit the nail on the head. Yeah.
Yeah, so we export 25% of our production, and very few industries are able to do that. So we are a very, Pankaj alluded to it. We are a great success story, but at the end of the day, we need to scale up. Okay, can we scale up 5x in next 5 years? If there's a vision to that, and if the government
Okay.
is willing to come
Okay.
in,
So
and
so
if
so let's look at solutions.
yeah,
Yeah.
great.
If I just add,
Let's look at solutions. Let's look at solutions in the key sectors that we've identified, because I think yes, go ahead.
I think there
no,
is,
because
sorry.
still sorry.
Yeah,
No, we're
Anupam,
still looking at only one aspect of the problem, which is from the supply chain aspect. But let's also not forget that there is the entire consumer side, right? And 60% of India's GDP comes from consumption. And if we start, let's say, banning Chinese products or even putting tariffs, which are prohibitive in nature, it's going to make all of our imports more expensive, or we'll have to try and find cheaper alternatives, or sorry, of lesser quality alternatives, which is going to reduce consumer choice, right? So ultimately, one of the great success stories is that, you know, your vegetable cart vendor who goes, right, has a phone, and that has been only possible because of trade. And so we can't hurt our own consumers in the name of hurting China. The second aspect is, can we actually hurt China? India accounts for only 2 to 4% of Chinese export. So even if we ban all of it, it's not going to make any dent in Chinese economy, right? So we got to be very, very realistic about what we can and cannot do, right? We can aim for higher, we should, but right now, this is the harsh reality.
I think one of the some action on our part is certainly called for. It's not things as usual. So even in our measured response, I would be a votary of not letting the Chinese come into projects in India. The projects, not just trade goods, we've discussed that at some length. I would say projects in the power sector, projects in the telecommunication sector, projects in ports. And the Chinese are following, as we all know, two routes. One, they directly bid, and they are able to outbid even Indian giants like the L&T, which they did last week in a metro contract. Because we do not know the Chinese costing system. No one in the world has been able to decipher that. Second, I think we also need to be very clear with the Chinese that as far we are willing to get hurt when it comes to projects, when it comes to national security issues, anything to do with defense, anything to do with electronics, because power projects, etc., can now be controlled by a switch in China itself. You can just switch off the electricity of a whole country if you know how to grid. So yes, so those kind of things, I would say, let that message go down to the Chinese clearly. That's a cost we are willing to bear. But on Indian industry, which is dependent upon Chinese import, be it, we just discussed automobile, it might be 4 or 5%, but those are critical items. Similarly, we do not want to stop making hand phones in India. It might be 40% still imports, a lot of it from China, but as much from Taiwan as a fair amount from Korea and elsewhere. Till we are able to tie up other markets, I think let's go along. It's going to cause disruption in labor, which is already an issue now with people out of formal work and informal as well. So let trade not be the actual leverage, but I'm also moving on to a third thing before I give the floor to other gentlemen. I think the Chinese are coming into the Indian market through their private equity. A hell of a lot of investment, particularly in the last 2 years, is that the Chinese private equity players are investing in not only startups, most startups in India, which we are touting as success, money is Chinese, not even, and no one else has much. Secondly, I think the control on the strategic industries also, we have to make sure that it is not passing into Chinese hands through this route. I would be careful, but I would not disrupt, just to sum it up, I would not disrupt trade relationships. We are a small player in the Chinese scheme of things. Chinese can probably do without us, but if we will be hurting ourselves if we were to put up tariff walls of a very high order if we were to ban items.
No, so obviously the idea, so the idea is to have a calibrated approach, not to sort of cut your nose to spite your face. Anupam, where do we draw that line? I think we're already pretty clear on areas which could impact security, where we want complete sovereignty. We've moved towards that. So you think that we're pretty secure in that sense, or is there more to be done?
No, I think on the investment front, it's I absolutely agree with Dua sir. So I think you can just broadly categorize into two. Blanket bans on investment again doesn't make sense because we have basically our investment rate has been falling for the last 10 years. It's from about 39% of GDP to about 29% of GDP. So we need investment irrespective of where it comes from. But you can categorize into two. One is, let's say, sensitive areas. So that would be, as he said, defense and so on, where you should not be allowing Chinese investment, telecommunications. But there are a whole bunch of dumb investments, right? So in, let's say, roads, not near the borders, but with internal infrastructure projects, basic dumb infrastructure projects, probably can get investment. But in terms of solutions, which we were talking about, where do we go from here? The good news, I'd like to probably end on a positive note. The good news is that we are already doing some
Yeah.
bits here and there, right? So we've already started instituting, for example, land laws. Karnataka has taken up some kind of land reforms, and MP, UP has taken up labor reforms. These were long pending reforms. I mean, from 1991, we've not touched these two aspects. And I think that will help Indian manufacturing. That will help actually shift some of the manufacturers from China into India because of COVID. The other big thing that we really need to be looking at is banking reform. And unless we really fix the capital flows to industry, which has been a big bottleneck, the NPAs and the balance sheet problems, I don't think we can solve this problem. So these are, two or three really big reforms that are kind of on the works, and we need to do that at a large scale and throughout the states.
Yeah.
All of the states, yeah.
Yes, Tamanna, I want to pick up a thread from what Mr. Dua said,
So land, labor, ease of doing business. Yes. Yes, Pankaj, just coming to you. I was just saying, land, labor, reforms, ease of doing business are long-standing issues and problems with or without China in the picture, which we need to work on. And we've promised, and we've started showing some steps. So that's a positive. How do we increase the speed? Yes, Pankaj.
I'm sure that the two leaderships will find a way to break this impasse, which is a military impasse. I also agree with all the panelists that the trade and business should not be affected. The other very important thing is that, the existing Chinese investments, what are there, should feel very safe and feel very protected. That will be a very strong message. Today, there should be a diplomatic war where we should tell the entire world that how profound and wonderful India is in terms of restraint, in terms of taking care of people who have accepted our invitation and have invested in India. That will be a very strong message. But I would again, that flip question which I gave, a $14 trillion economy next to you, economy with such humongous reserves, investable reserves, it is too attractive to let go by this jingoism. I'm not saying that we compromise our strategic and even 0.1%, but you started off so beautifully when you gave that example of somebody stamping on the television and so on. But let me tell you, the Indian consumer is a very wise consumer.
Yes.
The Indian trade and industry are very smart people. And what Vinny has been saying, I think that epitomizes it, that we will take very conscious decisions, very smart decisions, and which will build our economy, and particularly our industry is already on the right track. And we hope that by 2023, we will be exporting to China and components, sub-assemblies.
Right.
We'll be exporting to China. China will be one of our largest markets.
Okay. That would be great. That would be great. Let's see what happens by 2023. Vinny wanted to come in. Yes, Vinny.
Yes, no, I just wanted to pick up a thread from what Mr. Dua said and also what Pankaj said. Mr. Dua alluded to the fact that the pricing of Chinese products is very, very opaque, okay? And Pankaj is talking about exporting to China. I think the underlying thing is how can we be price competitive, right? And our challenge, say, when I talk to the government, they say, hey, we got to literally follow the WTO principles. Anything that I say that, look, I need an incentive because I am suffering because a particular, say, the Chinese, the Wuhan market, the Wuhan industry came out of the COVID and the Chinese government gave them flat 2% incentive for export. Okay. I tell my government says, no, we cannot because we have to be a fair competitor. Full marks on it. But I cannot run with my hands and feet tied up. Okay. I need a solution. Okay.
And China has admitted that.
Yeah, but the point is, Pankaj,
They have
how
withdrawn
to find
from
the solution is
debating
probably
that
the
they are a
time
market
is
economy. Yeah.
my
China has
problem.
accepted that.
But I think the point, Vinny is making a very important point that in India, if you look at the cost of the ultimate automobile, the highest portion is taxation, center and state combined, not raw materials. A point which I think the SIAM, ECMA have been making it for years together. I think instead of giving direct subsidy to them to get over the, in any form of whether it's a capital subsidy or a cash flow, etc., let's just try and lower the duty on GST on many of the products which go into car making. You will be helping the customers, you will be helping the industry, and the
Yeah.
jobs we want to create, all those jobs could probably come in this industry where we have
Yes.
to a large extent established our prowess.
Sure, it's interesting. It's interesting how it comes down to policy, how it comes down to basic issues that can make us competitive, and it need not be just a very broad, motherhood statement. There are already well laid out, identified measures that we can take, things we can do in different sectors to make ourselves competitive. I think the best way forward will be to start moving on those. And for things that we cannot substitute for now, well, we cannot substitute for now. Treat it as a trade deal like any other. That's really the best pragmatic way forward instead of throwing out that TV or that bowl of gobi Manchurian. On that note, I'd like to thank all of you for joining us on this first discussion on the India development debate.